All right, thank you all for joining us. My name is Blaine Einichner. I'm the project coordinator with the Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District. I'm joined here with Jason Nabier from Emmons and Oliver Resources, our engineering firm. He's a wetland specialist and will be the project manager for this Heath Avenue East Wetland Enhancement project. So we're going to do a short presentation, talk about some frequently asked questions from the survey that we sent out. And if folks have any questions, they can get a hold of us with the contact information we'll provide at the end of the presentation. So thanks again for viewing this. And here we go. I'm going to share my screen. Is that, can you see that, Jason?
Yep, looks good. Thanks.
All right. So here's the East Wetland Enhancement Project along Heath Avenue. So overview map here, I hope. All right, so the project, proposed project, or East Wetland, is located between Heath Avenue and Itasca Avenue, bound on the south by 235th Street North. It's a large wetland complex, over 200 acres in size. It is highly altered. There's several ditches that run through it that have drained this area in the past to be used for agriculture, was used for agriculture in the past. Those ditch lines are currently degrading, they're failing. So it has reverted into a wetland state. However, it is still exporting some excess nutrient downstream. This wetland drains eventually to Little Comfort Lake, crosses Heath Avenue at the star there indicated on the map, and then eventually finds its way to Little Comfort Lake. So why are we interested in this wetland? Oops. In the Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District, we do diagnostic monitoring to identify sources of nutrient for all the lakes in our basin or within our watershed. Essentially what this means is that we go out throughout an entire drainage network. We take water samples. We run analysis on those samples to see what type of nutrient is in the water. And then we also do flow monitoring. If we do this from upstream to downstream area, we can determine where we have sources of nutrient coming into the system. Once we identify those sources, we can go in and investigate further to identify where that source is coming from, and then develop or design a project to mitigate for those nutrients. So for the Little Comfort Lake area, we've got two studies that we'll be talking about today. The Little Comfort Lake Phosphorus Source Assessment that identified the sources within the Little Comfort Lake area. And then we had another study that looked specifically at the Heath Avenue subwatershed. So we'll talk about those briefly. Here's the Little Comfort Phosphorus Source Assessment. Map here of the study. So you can see here on the map, we've got the entire Little Comfort Lake subwatershed. The headwaters are the outflow of Bone Lake, flows downstream towards Manning Avenue through a wetland complex, then to Birch Lake. It's joined by the July tributary, enters into School Lake, and eventually crosses Itasca Avenue and enters Little Comfort Lake. Then we also have a western branch, which is the Heath Avenue area, which flows to the north, crosses Heath Avenue, and eventually finds its way into Little Comfort Lake. The purple and black dots there are the monitoring sites. These are where we collected grab water samples for analysis, and also did flow monitoring. And based on the distribution of these monitoring locations, we can see if nutrient is coming in upstream or down, or coming in from the upstream, and then we can identify that area as a potential source. We can then go in and do another study to determine the exact location of that source nutrient. If we look at the results of this study, we can see that the Heath Avenue area, the July Avenue tributary, and the wetland complex downstream of Bone Lake are potential sources of phosphorus. I'd like to note that this is the flow weighted mean of nutrient here, so it accounts for flow or water volume that's coming through the system. If you've got a high concentration of nutrient but don't have the water to transport it downstream, it's really not a source of nutrient for a downstream water body. All this data is in micrograms per liter. If we look at the data here from the upstream to downstream, we've got the outflow from Bone Lake. We've got around mid-30s of micrograms per liter phosphorus concentration. We then flow through a wetland and we record measurements here at the Manning Avenue. So we see that the wetland between Bone Lake and Manning Avenue is a source of nutrient. So we've got an increase in phosphorus concentration. That flow then goes into Birch Lake, which is a sink, or it's using up some of that nutrient. The plants are growing or it's getting deposited in the soils. We then join the July Avenue tributary comes in, and that's got a relative or very high mean phosphorus concentration, well over 1,000. That is a highly used agricultural area. There's some fields of row crops up there, and then also a cattle operation that is right in that tributary. So those are likely sources of nutrient for the July Avenue tributary. That flow then enters School Lake, where we have treatment. Outflow from School Lake is around 50. So the plants there in School Lake are absorbing that nutrient, that phosphorus, or it's being deposited in the soils. That flow then goes downstream past Itasca Avenue and into Little Comfort Lake. So that would be the eastern drainage of Little Comfort Lake, and then the western would be the Heath Avenue area, and you can see that the Heath Avenue area is also relatively elevated at 339 micrograms per liter. So we've got 3 areas identified in this study. If we look at the at table 5 there down below, you can see that Heath Avenue has a total load of 286 pounds per year. And quite a bit of flow, 314 acre feet. So we've got both the load and the flow to transport that phosphorus downstream. And if you look at the total suspended solids, we also have around 10,000 pounds of suspended solids. And what we often see is that areas that have a lot of suspended solids also have a lot of total phosphorus, and that's primarily due to the phosphorus being bound to those suspended solids. So we've got 3 areas identified here with this study. The wetland area between Bone Lake and Manning Avenue is currently being studied. We're monitoring that, and then we're reaching out to some landowners surrounding that area to look at their land management. The July Avenue tributary, we're working with that farmer along July Avenue on his land management, and also working with him to optimize his cattle operation, perhaps moving that cattle operation off the stream, installing some buffers to help filter out some of that runoff. And then the Heath Avenue inlet, the Heath Avenue area, we're reaching out to all of you to see if we can get a project going in this area as well. Jason, anything to add at all?
Oh, that was a good summary, Blaine. Thanks. Very interesting.
Thank you. So we identified Heath Avenue as one of the potential areas of nutrient for Little Comfort Lake. So we looked at that subwatershed with the Heath Avenue subwatershed assessment. The picture on the right there is the Heath Avenue outlet pipe. If you're unfamiliar with that, we've got quite a bit of flow coming out of this drainage. So good image there. So we looked at all these sub-drainages within the Heath Avenue area. We've got direct drainage around Little Comfort Lake in the purple there. So those are, wetlands or small little ditches, things like that, just drainages that go directly into Little Comfort Lake. We've got a few wetlands, the north wetland, the west wetland, and then a very large east wetland, which comprises about 60% of the entire area there, and then a development area with its own stormwater treatment. We also have some landlocked areas that would not flow to Little Comfort Lake unless there was a very large flood, 100-year flood type of situation. So we looked at all these areas, did some flow monitoring, did some modeling, and came up with these results here. The results indicate that the majority of the flow and load is coming from the east wetland, and the study recommends stabilizing water elevations within this wetland complex. So we look at the data at the top there. We've got over 60% of the flow coming out of the east wetland, compared to 12% in the developed area, 8% in the north wetland, 19% in the west wetland. So this is the largest drainage of this Heath Avenue area. So if we extrapolate out the drainage area based on the load that's coming out of this area, it works out to be 177 pounds per year of phosphorus coming from the east wetland. So the study said, or recommended that we stabilize water surface elevations within the east wetland, but also within the west and north wetlands, and then also suggested diverting flows from the outlet pipe into some depressional areas on the west side of Heath Avenue. This would be some stormwater treatment, essentially, or some water treatment for this drainage. The west and north wetlands will be addressed with the Highway 8 improvements. Chisago County and the Highway Department are working on expanding Highway 8. So with those improvements, they'll be addressing the west and north wetlands and also adding some stormwater treatment storage ponds in that west side of Heath Avenue area. But it'll take care of loads coming out of those areas. And then the Watershed District is trying to address the issues with the east wetland enhancement, or east wetland with a wetland enhancement in that area. Anything, Jason?
Only that, I mean, you mentioned briefly the stabilizing the water elevations, and do you want to talk a little more about that here, or do you have another slide maybe?
Yep,
on that?
we'll get to that in a few minutes. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yep.
So we've got all this data. It's pointing to the east wetland as being a source of nutrient. So what we would be proposing in this area is the installation of an adjustable weir that could be used to stabilize the water elevations in this wetland. What we tend to see in degraded wetlands like this is that they tend to export excess nutrients stored in their soils when they cycle between wet and dry periods. So if we can stabilize that water, we can restore the ecology, the ecological function of that wetland. It'll stop becoming a source and likely would become, after it's healed, become a sink for nutrients. So nutrient would come in from different drainages, just from runoff from the surface, the land surface, because it's a low spot, water will flow there, and it'll start to store that nutrient instead of exporting it downstream. So we're proposing an adjustable weir, similar to what is pictured in the bottom right. This is an adjustable weir that we have installed at the Bixby Park area, which we'll discuss later. And I'd also like to mention that we have a Clean Water Fund grant from the Board of Water and Soil Resources for this project. So we have funding. The image on the left there, you can see the green area, which is the existing wetland boundary. And this is defined by the state. It's based off of hydrology, soils, and vegetation. So we're very limited. Everyone is very limited in what they can do within that wetland environment. No construction, you need permits to add fill, to excavate, etc. So you're very limited in what we can do in those areas. Cannot build in any of those areas. So what we're proposing to do is just stabilize the water surface elevation within that wetland. We don't plan on increasing the wetland area, just stabilizing the water within that. So it'll just function more like a natural wetland once we were to implement the project. So I mentioned the Bixby Park project, and we'll use that as a case study here. Just talk about that a little bit. So similar environment to the east wetland. It's a large degraded wetland that was ditched in the past. It's located, if you're not familiar, it's just northwest of Forest Lake at the intersection or junction of Highway 35 and Highway 8. Again, a large wetland complex that was ditched at the turn of the century. Those ditches are now starting to fail, so it's reverted back to a wetland, but those ditches are still intact enough where it can export excess nutrient. So this project occurred in 2016. We went in and did excavation along those ditches, widened them in areas, created some floodplain in other areas essentially to store additional water, and then installed 2 adjustable weirs at the yellow dot locations there on the lower right-hand photo. So that's the after photo. And essentially we can manipulate the water surface elevation within this wetland. If we look at the next image here, another image, once again, we have the green is the defined wetland habitat as defined by the state. And as a part of the permitting for this project, we could not impact any structures. So this includes the housing development on the right and also the highways 84 and 8. So this project was designed to not exceed, to inundate waters at an elevation not to exceed 894 feet, which is the area in blue.
I can jump in,
Sure.
Blaine, on this. And so I was a project manager for this project, and you can see there's been some activity out in that wetland in the past, kind of on the south end. And what we did is basically picked up that drainage that was kind of routed to the ditch, and the weirs that Blaine has been talking about really just increase saturation within the soil column within the project. So it's not that we're impounding water above the surface, we're really keeping the soil hydrated. And as Blaine described, originally where the soils start dry out or desiccate, that's when we get that export of nutrients. And if we can just keep those soils wetted, they function better, they store nutrients, and the plants can actually access those and then, absorb it that way. So that's really the concept that we want to replicate with the East Wetland as well. We have a great example here, a good precedent in Bixby Park, and we're looking to replicate that same model. And
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, and the results of removal have been really quite exceptional in terms of phosphorus removal per year, just by re-wetting those soils.
Yeah, the project is actually estimated to remove more than 200 pounds of phosphorus per year from being transported downstream into the Sunrise River, ultimately into Comfort Lake, and then eventually into the St. Croix River. The image on the bottom right is the adjustable weir, one of the adjustable weirs at this project. You can see this weir, all the stop logs are removed. And because it is adjustable, we can remove those logs seasonally. So we'll come in during the fall, early winter, remove those to allow a free-flowing system throughout the winter. Therefore, if we have any like a rain on snow event or large spring runoff, we're not flooding out the highway or any of these developments. Once those floods have receded or the melt has occurred, we can put those boards in and then maintain that water surface elevation within the wetland for the growing season. So we're, like Jason said, we're proposing something very similar to this at the East Wetland. So back to the East Wetland, the objectives would be to reduce excess nutrient exports, again, mainly phosphorus, from the East Wetland and help improve water quality in Little Comfort Lake. In Comfort Lake, which is connected to Little Comfort Lake by a culvert under Highway 8. And it's also a high percentage of the flow for Comfort Lake. And then ultimately the Sunrise River and St. Croix Rivers. So Little Comfort flows into Comfort, Comfort flows into Sunrise, and Sunrise flows into the St. Croix River. So by implementing this project, we can improve water quality in all these bodies of water. So again, we're proposing an adjustable weir. Would maintain the water surface elevation in the wetland at around 902 feet above sea level. According to the current GIS surface elevation data that we have, the project would not increase the current wetland area nor impact any structures within the area, within the greater area of surrounding the wetland. And in order to permit this project, we have to meet those criteria. So can't expand the wetland, we can't impact any structures. The project itself is estimated to reduce phosphorus transport downstream to Little Comfort Lake by approximately 80 pounds per year. So that would be a significant amount that would help to improve water quality within the Little Comfort Lake and then the downstream water resources. I mentioned that our current data indicates that we wouldn't be expanding the wetland boundary. You can see on the map here, there's an area where the blue and green overlap. So that's something that we will be addressing with our survey work. There's a possibility that those contours are not entirely accurate just based off of the GIS layer that we have. We're planning on going in and ground truthing all of this and informing the design so that we would not exceed that or go outside of the current wetland boundary. So next steps would be that survey work. We'd go out, do some survey work within the area, both wetlands and adjacent upland areas. This would inform the design. Do we want the elevation actually at 902 feet, or is it 901 feet, 0.5, somewhere in there, or a little bit more even? So this survey work will inform that, and it also make sure that through that design effort that we're not impacting any areas outside of the project boundary. So that's generally our next step. We'll be reaching out to folks to get some permission to do some of the survey work. So keep that in mind. Next, I'd like to just go over some of the previously asked questions. We sent out a survey. Folks had some comments, concerns. I'd like to just address those, share them with the larger group. With some questions about mosquitoes and fisheries. The mosquito populations are anticipated to remain pretty consistent with pre-project population numbers. So we have no additional chemical mosquito control proposed with this project. However, as the ecosystem recovers, we should see populations of amphibians, fish, predatory insects like dragonflies, and birds and bats. We should all see those populations increase, and they will help to control any mosquitoes that we do have in the area. And honestly, the mosquito itself prefers the really stagnant waters, such as you'd find in an old tire in your backyard or in the woods, a bucket, water where there aren't predators present. So we'll have a diverse ecosystem, and it should help to reduce populations, depredate populations of mosquitoes. So we don't anticipate any more mosquitoes than you currently have in your area. And it's a possibility that your mosquito populations will actually decline with the recovery of the ecosystem in this area. There's a question about fisheries. Would game fish be coming up and using some of these wetland areas because there would be a slight increase in open water? It's probably unlikely that game fish will come up. They require some pretty specific conditions, high dissolved oxygen in the water and cooler temperatures within the water. The wetland environment's generally going to be a little bit warmer than, say, a lake and have lower dissolved oxygen levels. So we wouldn't see really any game fish likely coming up into the area. There's also a passage barrier at the Heath Avenue culvert. It'd be very difficult for game fish to get up and swim through that. So we likely wouldn't see any game fish. However, the area could likely be colonized, or probably is already colonized, by some of the hardier minnow species, such as the central mud minnow, which is the picture on the left there, or on the right there. And there'd be likely a few other species that would come in and occupy the area. Really hardy fish. They can tolerate some pretty less than favorable conditions. There were some questions about near wetland landscaping and low-lying properties. Again, we would not be expanding the current wetland boundary. So we're not increasing the wetland. If the landscaping is currently on the upland, it should not be affected. We won't be expanding that wetland area. If you have plantings within the wetland, they're either tolerant of wetland areas, so they're probably doing fine. The wetland enhancement would stabilize those soils. So if they're wetland plants, they'll probably do actually like that habitat. If you tried to plant upland species within the wetland during a dry year, they're probably already struggling and would not respond well to the project. But more than likely, those plantings in the long run wouldn't do well regardless. We get a wet couple years, they'll probably die off just because the wetland's functioning more like a wetland during the wet years. Low-lying properties, again, we'll be doing that survey work to ensure that we're not impacting any low-lying areas or any structures in any areas outside of the wetland boundary. If it's wetland, it'll remain wetland. If it's not wetland, if it's upland, it'll remain upland. So we're not proposing to increase any wetland area here. There were some questions about adjacent ponds. Would they continue to flow as they currently do? So we've got one example here. If we look at the image here, we can see that it's outside of the area of increased saturation, outside of the proposed area affected by the project. It should continue to drain as normal. It should not be impacted by that area or by the project. But again, we'll be doing survey work to make sure that these things are accurate. Got another pond here on the west side of the project. This is a stormwater pond for the development. Again, this is outside of the area of increased saturation, and this these ponds are actually protected by a berm with mature vegetation, trees along it. So again, outside of the area of increased saturation, the project area, and should continue to function as they currently are. With that, I'd like to thank you all for listening to our presentation. If you have any questions, you can reach me at these contact, this email and this phone number. If you have any neighbors that are interested, you can pass it on to them as well. Send them the link that I'll provide here for the presentation. They can take a look at it. Happy to come out and meet with anybody or chat with anybody on the phone. Give me a call. We can set up a time. I'll come out and we can walk your property, talk about any concerns that you might have. We'll also be looking to set up a in-person meeting sometime later this summer after we do some of the survey work. I'll have a little bit more information that I can share with folks. We can perhaps meet out on site and do a little field trip down to the wetland, take a look at it, and talk about the project. I will be reaching out to some of you later this summer regarding access to do some of the survey work, and also reaching out for folks to for permission and consent for the project. So with that, again, I'd like to thank you for viewing this presentation, and please give me a call if you have any questions. Jason, do you have anything to add?
That was well done, Blaine. Thanks for covering that.
All right. Thank you all, and please get a hold of me if you have questions or concerns.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.